You're listening to the White Blood Cells Podcast.
Harleys, street racers, and monster trucks, right? What do they all have in common? They're loud as shit, right? And it drives people, well, particularly me, it drives me nuts, but I think it drives a lot of people nuts. And so, you know, you and I have talked about this a lot before. I've got this propensity to want to pull these guys over all the time and give them my 2 cents, right? And sometimes that works. In the past, it didn't work that well because I would just be antagonistic, and it can be dangerous, right? And so I learned a better methodology of doing that. And so I always preface when I pull somebody over now on a Harley, I'm like, you know, I'm going to say something really probably kind of provocative to you, but and it might piss you off, but I want you to not be pissed off, okay? And that will mitigate some of the tension, of course, not all of it, because they don't know what the hell I'm going to say yet. So then I'm like, what if I took a ball peen hammer to the tank of your Harley? And they're like, well, I would probably kick your ass. And I say, exactly, and justifiably so, because, you know, I'm destroying your property, right? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, now I want you to imagine that loud tailpipe that you've got destroying the peace and privacy and whatever else you want to call it of thousands of people around you as you're driving through the city with thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people affected by your Harley pipes or your street racer pipes or your monster truck pipes, right? And so, you know, it's kind of this thought-provoking idea that I think at that point, I've had a handful of guys really take pause and maybe work through this conversation and understand, wow, you know, this is like Harley guys are usually about the freedom thing, right? It's freedom for them to ride, and that makes sense, to ride with the wind whipping through your hair or whatever, but the noise is taking away the freedom of other people, and that's, I think, what nobody really connects the dots on. So, you know, it's freedom for you, but it's anti-freedom for all the other people who don't want that. And so that's this thing that has really given me a lot of consternation for like the last 10 years or whatever. And so I've thought about, like, what's the commonality between all these guys? Harley guys are at the top of my list, but there's street racers, and there's a Fast and Furious guys too. Subarus, I think, are the main. Civics, right? I was trying to remember what are the cars.
WRXs.
WRX, Subarus, yes.
Yeah.
Lowered down, deep tinted windows.
Yeah.
But, you know, we've all heard them, and they've all got that common sound. And then there's monster trucks. Have you ever heard of rolling coal?
No?
No,
what is that?
So these guys, they'll have like 12, 15-inch tailpipes and intentionally like blowing black smoke out the back. That's called rolling coal.
Really?
I don't know. I'm not a car mechanic, and I know a lot of you guys out there that probably love cars, and the setup works. Like, that's what their intention is to do, is to like blow a bunch of black smoke out and make a lot of noise too. So same thing applies. The commonality between all these people is that they're driving people nuts, but I think there's another commonality between all these guys, and that is and despite the fact they don't like each other, I've asked Harley guys, what do you think about the street racer guys? And they're like, book of pussies, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the street racer guys, about Harley guys, I haven't had that many conversations that way because I'm not hanging out with a ton of, younger guys. I think it's mostly younger guys, so I haven't had the chance to ask them. But my guess would be that they probably don't like the Harley guys either. So there's this weird thing, but in spite of them not liking each other, I think there's a commonality in all of their thought process, and that is this idea that as men, they're not valued at all. And if you've listened to other experts like Jordan Peterson, for example, he talks about this Peter Pan syndrome, right? Where if society doesn't have any use for you and doesn't have any value in the things that you're really valuable for, well, then you will just go kind of be like, give a middle finger to society, right? And so your middle finger might be to get a loud car, loud motorcycle. It might be to go play video games in the basement. It might be just like
skateboard on the handrails in the mall.
You got like a million. So you've done that. Like, there's tons of outlets that the Peter Pan syndrome will lead to, right? And so this is part of the reason or the rationale behind my white blood cells thing, because white blood cells is more or less about guys finding what their purpose is, and really the purpose of men is to be productive. Well, I think we all know that, but it's also to protect, right? Our instinct as men is to protect the property that we have. Like if we work and produce things and then we have those things, we need to protect those things, whether that's stuff or our family or ourselves. At a minimum, it's ourselves, right? And we all kind of know we got to do that.
Right.
That's why we love, MMA, or we love boxing, because those are instinctive things. But then we need to just generally protect our family. And then at a larger level, we kind of have to protect society. And this is where, like, culturally, we've gotten totally unhinged. We have no instinct to protect society. I mean, that's up to the police or up to government or up to some. Why isn't it up to us, right? And I've talked about with you, Mark, about posses, right? Like forming a posse. And like, if you guys have watched Gunsmoke, I don't know, like there's probably this. You have to be probably 65 or 70 or over to remember Gunsmoke.
Bonanza.
But Bonanza, all those old Western shows would have, like, the guys would all get together. If there was some shit going down in town, they'd form a posse, and they'd go out and take care of business, right? And there is no parallel thing in our modern society for forming a posse. Although, do you know of any?
No, but I was thinking about, as a posse being like almost like a vigilante, and then does that go against like law and order?
It's totally kind of tied in with vigilantism, and that's part of, like, here's another old reference. Do you remember Charles Bronson movies? I mean, those were badass movies, right?
Right.
What was the name of it?
I'm trying to think of, like,
the main one. Like, I can't. Oh, it'll come to me. But what the hell was the name of that movie in New York where he's? Anyway, it is total vigilantism, and that again kind of is a cultural thing where we're short.
Is it Death Wish?
Death Wish, exactly, right? Like he just took care of business, and like, I mean, he snuffed those dudes out in no time. It's a cool movie for those of you who want to go back and get a reference point.
And if you want something a little bit newer, Mr. Nobody is also a good one.
Mr. Nobody, really?
Yeah, or John Wick.
John Wick is the same thing. I did watch a little bit of that. I didn't watch enough to really get into understanding what it's about.
It's a common theme because I think it resonates with men, right?
Totally.
Is like justice isn't being served, so I'm going to take it into my own hands, and I'm going to serve justice.
Well, look, I mean, throughout human history, and it's long, I don't know, like some people say humans have only been around for like 10,000 years, 50,000. Humans have been on this planet for like 50, not 50, like a million years, right? Cops didn't get invented really, I don't know, when did
you think about the Wild West, right? It was like, okay, mostly towns were protected by these posses, or they had a sheriff maybe.
Yeah.
But
maybe they had a sheriff.
So 1800s?
1800s is probably realistically when modern day law enforcement came about. But before that, what the hell were we doing? We were just like, hoping? No, it was men taking care of business and protecting themselves, right? And so my point about white blood cells is this, and I've said this to you before. In your body, there's millions or trillions of white blood cells, right? There's not just one white blood cell that, like, Donald Trump isn't going to be our one white blood cell that's going to solve our societal problems. It just can't happen. In our body, to maintain a healthy body, you have to have a system of white blood cells. And there's, I don't know the number, but it's on the order of multi-billions of white blood cells. Now, there's only 350 million people in this country, and half of those are guys. But guys are kind of like there's no question that we're the protectors, we're the stewards, and in my estimation, we're also the guidance system of culture. We're like a moral compass. This kind of leads me into my next kind of thought process and my speech about rules are for fools, right?
Mm-hmm. 40 million white blood cells per teaspoon of blood.
Damn, per teaspoon.
Yeah.
We got a lot. So multiply how many teaspoons of blood. You going to Google that?
Yeah, well.
I'm just teasing you, dude. Don't Google that.
I'm just saying, a lot.
No, but here, let's Google this. I already Googled this, so you don't have
Okay.
to. But how many rules are in the IRS code book?
Oh,
would you
geez.
guess? I don't know, because you can't even get they don't know. But there are 6,800 pages in the U.S. tax code, and that's just the tax code specifically. There's a guideline book that has 75,000 pages, right? That's in the IRS code. The U.S. code has about 60,000 pages of U.S. code law, right? We're in Colorado here. Colorado revised statutes, same thing. And there's 3,000 sets of laws that have like 1,000 sessions in those 3,000 sets. So the point of this is that we have thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of laws, but they're not doing us any good, right? I mean, the more laws we create, our society just seems to be getting worse morally. And so my point is, and there's a couple guys that have said, like, the more numerous the laws, the more corrupt the society or the government. And I can't remember whose quote that is, but the point of that is that, like, we don't need all these rules. They're not getting us anywhere. We need people to kind of enforce those rules. And more importantly, we need people with a moral compass to enforce those rules. And so going back to the white blood cells thing again, like, we can come up with all the rules in the world that we want, but we need somebody out kind of enforcing them and using a moral compass to execute it. And so really, that's the main theory behind the white blood cells purpose, is how do we start to develop that, like, that muscle memory or that moral compass. In my mind, it's the parallel is like working out. Like, if we want to have a strong body, we're going to work out like 2, 3, maybe 4 times a week. We got to work it out, right? If we're going to be I'm a tennis player, so if you want to be a good tennis player, if you don't play 3 times a week, you are going to lose timing. You're going to lose your touch. You're going to lose your just conditioning. You're going to lose all that stuff. So again, it's like almost everything else in life. Practice. To refer to Allen Iverson's, we're talking about practice.
Yeah,
it's practicing so many things in life is what you need to do. So the moral compass thing, my buddy, another good friend of mine, he comes up with really good rules, like tax code rules, to solve all this economic crisis stuff. And I'm like, dude, it doesn't. You come up with good rules every week that I talk to you, right?
we should make a law about this, or like, there should be a
got
rule.
Some pretty good ones. But the bottom line is, I'm like, none of it matters, because if you have corrupt people who are always willing to shortcut those rules or find a back door to those rules, the rules won't matter. What you have to have is a philosophically sound group of people, white blood cells, you need to have the cells, the people here. The men, I really think, are the white blood cells that are going to keep the protection of the body healthy. And so, to me, the practice is you have to involve yourself in reading about some stuff that is morally based, and then like going out and bouncing those ideas around with other people who are kind of the same ilk in mind and provoked and motivated by the same thing, to kind of build that muscle, which is the muscle of the moral compass. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, we've talked a ton about the Bible. The Bible is obviously extremely instrumental in all of our law in this country. And so there has to be an understanding of that. But then there's also just the willingness for us as men who aren't looking to go out and just punch people in the face and solve problems, violently and physically. You have to have like a mental composure and a mental fortitude about yourself that will allow you to think through these complex problems that are out there. And then there's a handful of rules that are important for us to apply. You can't steal. You can't steal is really you can't take other people's stuff, whether it's their privacy, whether it's their stuff, whether it's their wife, whether it's their life. You can't take other people's stuff. And that really is the cornerstone rule. I've thought about this a lot. You just can't take other people's shit. I mean, that's like almost everything, every other rule derives from that. And so, but then how to execute on that and when to apply that rule, that's the complicated, that's the sticky part about life is like, when do I employ these things and when do I take a step back and how do I do that? And that's part of what my want for white blood cells is, to try to get guys that are a little bit more cognizant of those things and like use the strength of the mass, the group the group think of this what I'm hoping to become a group to develop, right? So that's kind of my intro to the white blood cells thing to start. And I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I guess I would love to talk through a couple thoughts or things that came into my mind as you were talking about this and how you would debate this. Okay. So you said in the beginning, you talked about someone invading your space with their sound, right? Like there was peace, and then all of a sudden they came in with their Harley big hog and interrupted your peace, right?
Right.
So I get that. Now, during the COVID crisis, a lot of people who were on a certain side, they said, how dare you not get vaccinated and infect my airspace with your virus?
That's a good one, right?
And so how can you, because I would say you probably would be like, no, like you can't tell me to get vaccinated. You can't tell me to use, but it's like, oh, it's for grandma. It's for the greater good. It's so that you don't infect the rest of the world with your sickness. Like you need to get vaxxed so that we all can have peace.
That's a really, really tricky subject. And you can get into some territory here where, there's a lot of gray area and ambiguity, right?
Yeah.
And so that one, to me, I don't know how you necessarily define that. Humans and creatures have been on this planet breathing the same air for millions of years. And so I don't know that there's a lot of credence to that. I think that was a fear tactic that was, but I see what your point is. And this is part of why your brain, your muscle that this brain has to be strong enough to figure out, like, how do I sort through that? And maybe I don't have an answer right now, but that's a good thought. And like, how do we sort through it and think about it? I don't know. How would you respond in the comparison with noise? I mean, noise to me seems like... Yeah. Remember the thing that we just talked about the other day? When you're born as a baby, you're scared of two things.
Right. Yeah, falling and loud noises.
Loud noises. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like noise is a pretty distinctly kind of annoying and fear-provoking thing. I don't know. So for me, that's just kind of my main... It's my biggest pet peeve for the last 10 years, and that's just an example. There are plenty of other examples of things.
And I would guess I would come down to, or I would think about, like I think about other people a lot of times, right? It's like, even with noise, even in our own house, right? If my kids are sleeping, I'm being cognizant that they're sleeping, and I'm not going to just crank the radio and just be like, I want to listen to my music loud. It's Friday night, and it's my house, and you guys, it's like, no, I'm trying to respect their space. Yes. And so probably, and again, I'd be curious to hear another opinion. So I guess if you're listening to this or watching this, then leave a comment in the comment section if you have an idea. But it would be this idea of that, you need to be a respectable, responsible human being in order to think outside of yourself about how what you do affects other people. because I think if you don't care about anything or you don't care about anybody else, then it doesn't matter what you do, because you could care less about what your neighbor thinks or what some stranger who is on the road.
That's a great point to bring up. And as men, that's part of what I think, too. A lot of us have been trained to have this attitude of, I don't care about other people, which is that is not a masculine quality, to just be alone. I mean, to be a loner is something that we've trained in culturally. I believe that we've trained each other to do, because men are not structured that way. I don't believe that men want to be protectors. I don't know. Like, tell me if I'm wrong. Like, you're inherently wired. If you have I have kids, you're inherently wired as a man to protect those kids. Yeah. Even as a boy, if you have a young man, if you have a brother or sister, if you're you're inherently wired to protect those people, I think. I mean, there's only strange things that cause us to pull away from that. So somehow or another, culturally, we've gotten short-circuited from our inherent instincts to want to be protectors. So, but there's a lot of it out there that, like, we can justify this whole me orientation that we have in this society. There's just a tidal wave of that sort of thinking out there, and that's part of what I want to kind of try to address. How did this Peter Pan syndrome come up? This me orientation thing come up? Because it is the counter to what we as real men should be looking for. And I think our real, like, once you start to get your arms around this, and I think you and I have kind of gotten to this place in our lives where once you start to really understand what your purpose is, your confidence and your capability to see things through that lens gives you confidence, and it helps you understand what your purpose is. Your purpose is to protect yourself, your family, your community, and these concentric circles outside of that. But, like, focus on the real close concentric circles first, our family, ourselves and our family. But not impinge on, if you got kids sleeping, but if your neighbor is trying to, like, sleep, I got a neighbor whose dog will wake up every morning. He'll let the dog out at 5 a.m. My wife can't sleep. Barking. Once that dog starts barking, it's over. She can't get back to bed. I can't go back to sleep. That's a whole other Oprah. So
you're up at 5.
That's a whole other Oprah. But, I guess 5 isn't bad. But, some people don't want to get up at 5. So, I mean, that conscientiousness, that's a word that doesn't get used a lot, does it?
No, conscientiousness.
Right.
So how do you develop that, you think?
I think you have to be, exercising that muscle. I think conscientiousness is a product of knowing about another concept that I like to talk about a lot, which is personal responsibility. That's another thing, right? We talk about personal rights all the time. In this country, we're all about rights. I have the right to X, Y, Z. I talk about inalienable rights all the time, life, liberty, and property. But nobody talks, I shouldn't say nobody. There's a handful of people, guys that watch YouTube, watch Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, a couple of my favorite guys. Jordan Peterson talks about responsibility all the time. He says it's the opposite
12
side.
12 rules for life.
12 rules for life.
Make your bed.
There's all kinds of, but he says that basically your responsibility allows you to have access to your rights, right? So, or something along those lines. I'm probably paraphrasing that badly, but the bottom line is there are two sides of the same coin. You must have personal responsibility and recognize that as a force in life. And I think in sociological terms, personal responsibility to me is the equivalent of gravity in the physical universe terms. I think personal responsibility is the thing that keeps us all glued together and operating in a functional sense, right? So in other words, if you cut somebody off in traffic, you might, if personal responsibility is really working, you might crash your car from cutting that person off, or something bad might, if you impinge on somebody else's territory, there might be consequences. So this is the thing about personal responsibility. It's kind of an equalizer in the universe. It's always keeping us kind of on our, conscientiousness game. We got to be cognizant of that stuff. And this is part of what I think is really philosophically important to understanding, like, what is our life about and what keeps this world spinning the way it does.
Yeah. So I guess how does one person learn these things? Because for me, I teach my kids. One of the things I always talk to I ask my sons or even my daughter. I just randomly will say, "What does integrity mean?" And integrity means you do the right thing even when no one's watching, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, my thought is if I can teach them how to be integrous human beings, then they'll be successful in life, right? Because they'll be doing the right things even when no one is watching. And so that's even you're walking and you see a piece of trash on the ground. Instead of walking past it, maybe just pick it up and put it in the trash, right? Like that just makes sense to me, Or if you you maybe have an opportunity to take something that was put into your grocery basket at King Soopers and it didn't scan and nobody's going to know, it's like, all right, what was the right thing to do?
Right.
Well, the right thing would to not take that thing,
right.
Be integrate. And so I guess, but what I see is a lot of younger people, unfortunately, their parents are both working. They're being raised by the internet and social media, and nobody's investing in them to learn these things. And then they grow up and become young adults and start participating in society. And it's like, well, now it's like, how can you hold somebody to that standard when they were never taught those things?
That's another really, really good question, and I think that's part of what I think as men too. Like I've written a lot of stuff about apprenticeship and mentorship, right? And this is another concept that I think our education system totally disregards. There's no concept of apprenticeship or taking a young man and teaching him how to do these things like you talked about, to work, to operate with integrity, to operate with a moral compass, to think of others before you're thinking of yourself. And it takes, we're not born into this world just magically knowing how to do all that stuff. We have to be trained into becoming that type of person. And I think it's up to, these older generations right now. I mean, a lot of our older generation, they're like, I want to just go play golf. I want to drink wine and play golf. I don't care what happens. It's I'm gonna be dead soon.
I
already had my fun. No, man, that's the most toxic. I don't believe in retirement because of this. I mean, I believe that you may not have to dig ditches or, maybe put together rocket engines or whatever, but because you're too old, maybe your body's aged, but you do have wisdom. And so that wisdom is imperative to be passed along. So to answer your question, I mean, there's a gap right now that we have where young guys are just like hanging out in the wind. And that's part of what the whole purpose of this thing is for me too, is like, I know too many teenage boys, my son included, who are just lost. They don't have any direction because we weren't teaching them stuff. I didn't really start paying attention to this until about 10 years ago, about philosophically, like how do I train my kids and other kids around them to have this instinct and to have this, not instinct, but this knowledge base to go out and become stewards. We are stewards of our planet, of our country, of our community, and of our family. We're stewards of these things as men. And I mean, you can debate if you've got comments or questions about that. You think that there's a better purpose for men, please let us know. I'm happy to hear alternatives. But in my estimation, that's really what I've understood my life to be about. And most of the guys that I talk to that have kind of matured to a point where they recognize that life isn't just about me anymore.
Yeah.
It really shouldn't be about me. It never probably should have been about just me, because we're always growing to the point. I mean, when you're young, you're kind of trying to get your feet wet and try to take care of yourself. And there's no question that as a teenager, you kind of just got to take care of yourself. But then after you learn how to take care of yourself, you're expanding that sphere of like, I'm going to start helping other people. And then by the time you get to 54, which is what I am now, you're trying to help other people below you and help them understand, well, there has to be some exercise going. And I keep referring to physical exercise because we're all totally attuned to going to the gym. Mm-hmm. There's not one person out there who would probably argue with like the idea that like going to work out or doing some physical activity is totally important.
Yeah.
I don't too frequently hear people saying, you need to read philosophy books and or chat with people about your philosophy. That muscle needs to be strong and healthy
Critical
too.
thinking.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, it's big.
I don't see many people. Do you know a lot of people? I mean, there's different circles, and we could go into that path. There's probably tons of circles that we can get into where they do. But broadly speaking, I don't think that's a popular concept.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess my question would be is like, all right, where do we start? Like where, say someone's listening to this, like they're a young man and they want to grow and they want to, become a white blood cell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, where do you start?
That's a really good question. So I am putting up like a library of books that I've been reading that I think are really, really useful books. There's one, I'm writing a book right now too, and it's called The Leader of Yourself. And really, I think that is a great starting place for young men. And it's not finished yet, so I'm working. Hopefully in the next 3 months, this thing will be out. But I've got other books, a resource list, library that we can refer to. And just in the absence of that stuff, Jordan Peterson, we all know, like you can YouTube that guy, and he's talking about a lot of this stuff day after day. And I think that there's not a smarter man on this planet than he is in the respect of understanding masculinity and what the purpose of men really is. And I'm probably tooting his horn a little too much. I don't know if he would disagree or not, or if you disagree. If you have some other resources, Mark, tell me what you would recommend.
No, I mean, you know me, so
yeah.
I think knowing is half the battle, right? So there's an element of knowing, like, okay, I know I want to get out of this depression that I'm in, or get out of, so many guys are addicted to porn or just playing video games constantly. Like there's just no fulfillment or meaning in their life. They've self-medicated and done everything just to a disgusting level, and they feel like, is this it? Is this like all there is to life? And it's like, no, there's more,
There's a lot more. And you're right, that addiction, those addictions, I should say, are just a surrogate for what your life needs to be about. You're just, if you're involved in porn, if you're involved in video games, if you're involved in self-aggrandizing, drinking, drugs, any of these, gambling is another one. Like how often
sports betting,
how many, they're just beating that into your face on television every time you turn that thing on. So all those things are just a distraction from what our lives really want to be about. And we all know that. I mean, anybody who's been addicted to anything, and I'm addicted to anger, for God's sake. I'm a total anger addict, which is why I started writing the book that I'm writing too, by the way, because I know there's a ton. That's I think a more prevalent problem than our culture gives any.
Anger?
Well,
because you know where anger stems from.
Tell me.
Fear,
yes.
Because when you're afraid that you're not good enough, you're afraid you don't have it. You're afraid, that you're not achieving your greatest, abilities. Like you react in anger. Fear is what underlies all anger.
Thank you for bringing that up, because you're totally right. That is what drives all of our addictions. But anger is it's the most common addiction, because nobody even constitutes that it is an addiction, I don't think. I mean, nobody's ever said, hey, Ted, you're an anger addict, even though I'm probably at the top of the chart on that thing. But like most people just say you're an idiot. And it's dismissed as if it's not even an affliction, which it is an affliction of this fear thing. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that is the roots of it all. It's like we all have this fear of we're just not good enough. We're not valuable enough. And we don't even know what we're supposed to be a lot of times, because this messaging that we're getting in our lives is so confusing. We just got to go out and make money, be a famous guy on YouTube, and all these weird messages. And those aren't the cores, roots of any of what we should be, I don't think. And that should be is like, that's subjective too. But I really think that at somewhere deep in our core, our our fears are driven by just a lack of understanding of what is our real purpose here. What are we supposed to do? I think we're supposed to be protectors, but we're also supposed to be adventurers. I mean, men are set up to like adventure, to go out and find out what the hell this world looks like, and to knock some heads around, like find out, like sometimes you got to bounce stuff around. And I think that's what real masculinity is intended to do, is to go out and be adventurers, right?
Yeah.
Be discoverers.
So with this, like, what is your whole, like, what do you hope to achieve with this podcast, or with, the content you're creating? Like, what kind of value are you hoping to bring back to
Well,
people?
number one, it's what you said, is awareness of number one, that we're kind of caught in a quagmire. There's a problem. There's no question, I think, and probably a lot of people who are watching this could agree with the fact that there is a problem for guys in this culture. And so awareness of it, number one. And then number two is like, okay, so now that I'm aware, now what do I do? And so, resources, like what books do I read? Who do I talk to? What do I start thinking about? This thought process that has to be in our mind has to really be a regular exercise that we're kind of dealing with pretty regularly, or it's just that muscle will atrophy again, and we'll go back to our addictions. So awareness, resources, and then creating kind of a network, because, community. We got to have a community of people who are kind of the same mind and of the same central spirit. We got to kind of have a community of people that you can build upon. And that's really where the strength of like I said, you can't have one white blood cell.
Yeah.
It can't be Donald Trump is not going to solve all of our problems. There's other examples. Jordan Peterson, he can't, as smart as he is, he can't be the only guy that's talking about this. We all have to build up a certain amount of knowledge, awareness, knowledge, and then execution of these ideas, right? Execution being the doer stuff. Like, I think part of what we were talking about a while back was like thinking and doing, and I can't remember this. I'm probably gonna lose track. But.
Yeah, a lot of people get addicted to just learning, for instance, right? It's like you can read all these books and learn all these things and watch all these videos, but then you never actually go out and do stuff, And so I think there's been a whole culture of these gurus who they essentially learn something and then they teach it.
Yeah.
They don't learn it, do it, and then teach it. And I think if you're going to be successful with anything that you do, you got to learn it, you got to teach it, or you got to learn it, you got to do the thing that you've learned, and then you can teach it.
You just got to keep. That's a great point. Is doing it. There's I should have brought this too, because this guy did this study on how we learn things, and he's like, you remember about 10% of the things that you read. You remember about 20, and I'm misquoting these numbers, of course, but you'll get the gist. 10% of what you read you'll remember. 25% of what you read and reread, you'll remember. Like 50% of what you read, reread, and then write down some stuff about. And then he's like, you will remember like 85% of stuff that you read, reread, write down, and then actually go do some stuff with it. So it's a whole process. I mean, this is life. I mean, life requires a lot of practice in doing these things. Like, so what do they say about, like, if you want to learn how to play the guitar, or you want to learn how to, whatever thing you want to do, play tennis, you got to do 10,000 hours.
Right.
And we all kind of know that and understand that, but we don't think about it in the respect of thinking and being, like you said, critical thinking is just a totally overlooked idea in our culture.
Maybe that's something we can do a whole topic about, and talking about how do you even develop that critical thinking muscle, and how do you start to because I think that's a good foundation too, is like I don't even know if you can really even articulate, okay, what does it mean to critically think, and how do you, if you're not critically thinking, how do you learn how to develop that muscle?
It's a good question, man, because I don't know. Like when I was young, I think I'm inherently curious, and I did not like to read at all until about 10 years ago. Before that, reading would put me to sleep. So reading was really like horrible outlet for me. And I think now at this point in my life, it's necessary. You must read a little bit every day, or at least a couple times a week, I think, because you like watching television or getting on a phone. I mean, you just like you learn differently. So reading is really, really important. But curiosity isn't like inherent to everybody, right? Like I was inherently kind of curious about stuff, so I'd go out and adventure. But I think that's having this adventurous spirit and learning how, like, not even learning, but just paying attention to that message in your mind. I think most of us are adventurous in some way or another. So following that adventurous instinct that you have and letting that pull you to the areas that are of interest is probably the most productive way to get to things. Because there's no one vein of this that is like absolutely not. I mean, you can take paths into this a billion different ways. I think it's just find whatever your path of interest is, I think, is the important thing. And then like we are saying, like this network or this community of guys, like you can't be around people who are going to make fun of you every 10 minutes that you're talking about philosophy stuff, because it's not going to go anywhere, right? So if you're hanging out with your buddies and they're like talking about the Broncos, we live in Denver, if they're talking about the Broncos every 2 minutes, you're probably not going to make much headway on talking to them about, what does personal responsibility mean? That's why I think like we got to develop a little bit of a community interest in this thing. So
iron sharpens iron.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes. We got to have other people to bounce it around with. So,
yeah.
I mean, I've said this before, but it's like I've practiced public speaking a lot and I stink at it still, but it's just like one of those things that you must.
Did you do Toastmasters?
I did Toastmasters, and it's a good place to start. To get yourself an audience of people to talk in front of. So if you're totally nervous, like I was and am, to speak in front of people, at least you
break the ice.
Break the ice a little bit. You like fall on your face, because you're going to fall on your face with like anything that you do, and that's how you learn. This thing, you will fall on your face. You're going to get made fun of. I mean, people like I go to my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner, and they immediately get pissed off that I'm talking about, politics, or I'm talking about something that's way too beyond, what the potatoes taste like, or, who's going to do the dishes. I mean, if we're talking about certain groups of people that you're just going to piss off, and sometimes you're going to fall on your face, and the falling on your face could be somebody telling you to shut the fuck up and leave them alone. And, so you learn how to navigate, but the only way you're going to learn how to navigate is by doing. You got to go out and do. You got to go out and adventure with it, and then
get
rejected and get laughed at, whatever it takes, man. But like we're men, we're warriors too. Part of our spirit as men is to be warriors, right? We're not sitting in a closet. We're not sitting in the basement playing. But that's not warrior. Playing what's
Call of Duty?
Call of Duty. Yeah. That's not a warrior, right, man? Go out and be a warrior. And I'm not saying like, I'm not talking about physical violence. I'm just talking about like test these ideas, test them out. If and like I'll talk more about my ventures into the Harley and street racer world. That's not like, that is genuinely dangerous territory. And I've tested some territory there. I'm not recommending that for anybody. That's stupid, because it is really potentially dangerous. I'm just talking about having simple conversations. So another thing that I am doing is creating t-shirts with just sayings, just like some basic sayings to provoke conversations with people. And like, the funny thing is, when I first started wearing these t-shirts, nobody even looked at them. Nobody said anything. But one of my favorite t-shirts is Defund Narcissism. And I've been wearing that t-shirt a lot more lately. And man, people are really like interested in it now. They're like, oh, that's really cool. I've had some cool conversations that have sprouted out of that. So yeah, man, I mean, that just the practice, just getting your feet wet on this idea of like, testing some territory that you're maybe not comfortable with initially, and like, let's get out there and see what this looks like, and just see if we can start rebuilding our strength as white blood cells, man.
All right. I love it.
Yeah. That's it. All right. So is this the outro?
This is it. Like and subscribe, follow, and share.
and share this thing. We'll have more videos coming in the future. There's no question. We want to do a podcast, I don't know, on a regular basis, just like we're going to exercise our minds. We're going to exercise our videos here as well. So any feedback you guys can offer, though, I am willing to hear it and love to hear it. So whatever you got in the comments section, please let us know.